everyone, and welcome back to MFA Writers. My name is Bree Gumaz, and I'm your co-producer. We hope you are all enjoying your summer. The team is traveling, writing, and taking advantage of the long summer days. We hope you enjoy this re-release. We'll be back in the fall with Season 7. Before we begin, if you ever have comments or questions, we would love to hear from you. Send us a DM, tag us, or comment on our latest post on Instagram and Twitter, or email us at mfawriterspodcast@gmail.com. If you would like to be a guest on our show or know someone who would be a great fit, you can apply at mfawriters.com. And while you're there, if you love the podcast and would like to support us, you can buy us a coffee or donate directly at buymeacoffee.com/mfawriters. Your donations make all the difference, and every time we see one pop up in our inbox, know that it makes us smile and feel all sorts of loved. Last but not least, don't forget one of the greatest contributions of all, which is rating and reviewing the podcast on your podcast player of choice. I hope you enjoy.
Welcome to MFA Writers, the podcast where we talk to creative writing MFA students about their program, their process, and a piece they're working on. I'm your host, Jared McCormick. Today I'm with Tyler R. Moore. Tyler is a fiction writer from Ashwaubenon, Wisconsin, who is currently in his second year in the MFA program at the University of Illinois, located in Urbana-Champaign. He is the winner of the Hobart L. and Mary K. Peer Fiction Prize. He also holds the titles of Current Associate Managing Editor and Associate Creative Nonfiction Editor for Ninth Letter. His work is published or forthcoming in Michigan Quarterly Review and elsewhere. Today, Tyler has brought an excerpt to read for us from a piece titled The 48th Hour.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm going to preface this excerpt by saying that it's from the middle of a story that I've been writing for a while. And I think all you need to know is that it's told through a series of voicemails. And it's about a guy who encountered a woman on a bridge, and he's kind of relaying that story. And he's also in the process of writing a sort of James Patterson-esque kind of novel, and he's so I make references to that novel he's writing as well. But this is from The 48th Hour. Japan must be bonkers, Sasha. What time is it for you? 4 a.m? Remember the last time we stayed up until 4? I kept making Shin Ramyun black. You'd down your bowl, and I'd have another waiting for you. I knew you were too polite to turn down an already made bowl, and you were too polite to tell me that you wanted to go home. I took advantage of you, Sasha. I'm sorry. But I enjoy your company. We really got into it, though. Everything from your cousin Albert's 6 elected surgeries. The glimmering little seeds of 48H. It was that long ago, yes, Sasha. Your bank teller getting all flustered her first day on the job. And I still respect how you handled that situation. They've got our lives behind that screen of theirs. They need to know what they're doing. But, from the way you told it, it sounded like you handled it with grace. What was it that you said? She said your account was frozen, and she didn't know why. You asked for a manager, which made her nervous. And that's when she told you it was her first day. And then you told her, this is a brave thing you're doing. Going forward every day into something new. And it's hard to believe you said it exactly like this, Sasha. But it's also the easiest thing in the world to believe, because it's never the facts of the story that matter. It's how they make us feel. Except, Sasha, I think for the case of Juliet's story, some facts do matter. That's why it's been bothering me so badly. What if I told Juliet that? This is a brave thing you're doing, going forward every day into something new. Instead, the police lights flickered across the river, and her hair was going wild, and there I was on the side telling her about the ghost, how it was Danny all along. Have I told you this part yet, Sasha? It clicked so perfectly. Body switched. It was all a test, an elaborate game. Make Jake see the truth. The system didn't fail Danny, Jake did. Danny is the ghost. I'd gotten Juliet talking by this point, and we were going on and on about Noah, how he wasn't eating because of all the bugs. So Juliet had to buy him pre-cooked meals from the grocery store, except the grocery store also became infested with bugs, and so every meal became takeout until the city, too, was bugs. And then it was the earth. And once the earth is bugs, it's difficult to argue. I see her point there. But Juliet asked me something then, when I explained the reveal. How could anyone care? How could anyone possibly care about the characters when everything's gotten so big? Isn't that an issue? And I didn't know what to say, because I wanted, with everything in me, to argue. But who was I to argue with someone like Juliet, in a moment someone like Juliet was in? You know what I mean, Sasha. You always know what I mean. And so I grabbed Juliet's hand, which I was scared to do up until this moment, frightened that I would signal desperation, a desperation that she would mirror with further desperation, which could result in a push to the unfortunate situation. But she did, in fact, let me hold it. I tried thinking of you, Sasha. What would Sasha say? So I told her, all of my characters are me. You've thrown this accusation at me before, Sasha, and I hear your point, even if I don't fully believe. All of my characters are me, and the big world and the big action cuts between me and the characters. Given this, we can't face each other, but we can intuit each other's psyche by facing a similar light. Yes, I believe my characters are thinking of me, and that's the only reason I think anyone else will care. When I, the author, fade, and my characters think of me, that's when I'm the most real. It's why I'm holding your hand, Juliet. I think of it similarly. My experience of my hand is your experience of my hand, but there's a big world with big action cut between. And so my experience of my hand fades, and all that's left is your story. It's difficult to know how she interpreted this, Sasha. Do you think being told a lie like this would help you? I think it would help me. For example, if you return my calls, or return from Tokyo, and tell me about your trip, and you start telling me about the shrines, bamboo gardens, wooden castles, or Mount Fuji through the fog even, I think I would like that story better than whatever hijinks you've clearly gotten yourself wrapped up with. Except, I want the best for you, Sasha. We all should experience what we deserve.
Tyler, that was great. Thank you so much for reading that. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
All right, so you are a writer who loves to experiment with structure. In fact, you told me that you almost never have two stories that feel the same. So what is it about playing with structure that motivates your writing and or drives your writing process?
I think I have maybe two different answers to this question, and I think the first easiest one is that it's just more fun for me this way.
Yeah.
I I think I get bored if I just kind of start writing the same story over and over again, which is not a knock on people who do write the same story over and over again, because I think those people oftentimes know what they're doing, probably doing more than I do, because I think sometimes this is a trait of mine that sometimes feels like that I don't know what I'm doing, and so I'm just kind of throwing everything out there. But it keeps things fresh for me, and I also think that there is something to the core of what I write that is similar every time I write. So this isn't to say that I don't write the same thing, but I think structurally it does feel very different every time, and then that keeps it fresh. Um, but then also on a more technical level, I think the reason I'm drawn to just playing with structure is that it feels like every story inherently does need to have a different structure just based on who the characters in the story are about. And and I think structure is the thing that tells us most about who a character is and what a story is supposed to be about. I often find meaning and a story through the structure, maybe
Mm,
first and foremost. So that's on a technical level, I think it's almost necessary, but on a personal level, it's just it's more fun.
yeah. Yeah, and having fun is important, right? That's the thing that, like, we should probably talk about more as writers. Sometimes I hear writers talk about the actual writing process as torture, but if you can find a way to make it fun, the writing tends to be better.
Maybe I think sometimes I'm most skeptical about myself when I am having fun. Like if I've written a line that makes me laugh, I'm like, well, that's probably not any good then. Um,
Interesting, yeah.
but I keep them in there sometimes just because it feels like it's the right thing to do, and whether or not it's successful is up for I guess the reader to determine. But so yeah, I'm on the fence on whether or not you need to have fun to for a writing to be good, but I do like to have fun while I'm doing it at
Yeah,
least.
right. Right. Yeah. I'm sure that a lot of great stories have been written that were miserable to write. I have no doubt about that, but yeah, it is a lot more fun to actually enjoy the writing process for
Yeah.
sure. Um, so what about your reading life? Do you find that you're drawn to reading stories that have kind of unique structures as well?
Uh, yes and no. I think my reading taste is more diverse than what I put out there. I'm really into people like Lori Moore, or Dennis Johnson, or Larry Brown, or ZZ Packer, or um, and a lot of those people are very traditional kind of writers who often, I think, at least maybe a thing that's similar to all of them is the sense of voice that they embody. Um, but it's hard because I often feel like stories that play with structure too much, like who's someone like David Foster Wallace, who I respect in many ways, but also oftentimes find him kind of gimmicky. I oftentimes worry that maybe that about my own writing is that I get too gimmicky with it, but I can't help but do that. But um, I do pay attention to writers who play with structure a lot. It's just I worry. I think the thing that I worry about it the most is that it does feel gimmicky, but when it does pay off, it kind of pays off the most. So it's kind of those writers who play with structure who aren't in my view the most consistent, but who excite me the most. And it's hard to like when David Foster Wallace hits, he hits, right?
Mhm.
But sometimes he annoys me to no ends.
Right.
But, and I wish I could think of other I'm sure there's other examples, it's hard to think of off the top of my head, but, so yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say it's the thing that I seek out for reading. I think I try to incorporate other elements of things into my from my reading that I'm not necessarily drawn to incorporate that and to strengthen other parts of my writing, but yeah.
Well, you used to be a poet, and I feel like form and structure are things that poets in particular think a lot about. Do you feel like your past life as a poet affects the stories you write now?
I think it has to, and I don't know if I can give you an intelligent answer as to how it does. I think for example, like maybe like 2 weeks ago, I kind of just like went through this like the poetry that I was writing like in undergrad, and it was like the first time I had done that in years. And I looked back at it, and like I couldn't even like figure out how I was coming up with the ideas for what I was doing with language. Not that any of it was any good, really, but like I couldn't even like put myself in that headspace of like how did this person come up with to do that with language in this moment? And because it's not something that I do a lot anymore. I mean, I think I do it on a subtler way that you kind of need to do with fiction. But I think what poetry, that experience has given me is that it kind of I was able to break all the rules for a long time. Not that poetry, because you have to impose your own rules on poetry, right? But I was able to experiment way more than I was maybe if I started with fiction. I think I would have limited myself too much, and now that I know all the rules I can break, I can know very specific instances on when to break them in fiction writing or what's even like a possibility with form. Um, I think I like received forms a lot in poetry, which I think oftentimes it's very not controversial, but just people oftentimes look down upon a sestina or a guzzle because it just feels too old fashioned nowadays. But I think there's something kind of beautiful about these strict rules of a brand new form and what that can say for like an entire body of work. Because I oftentimes try to think of, when I'm writing short stories at least, like how would this fit into like a larger body of work,
Right.
and what does that form say? Um, and because I think I can agree that a form poem can feel limiting and like, is it ever going to be the greatest thing in the world, a form poem? I think it can, but I think it's hard. Um, and that's kind of the same with a very strict kind of form story as well. It feels like you're, oftentimes it can feel gimmicky, it can feel like you're just putting an idea that could be bigger inside of a box, but what it's doing for that story in that moment, I think can also be saying something larger when in putting context with other work, maybe. And I think that's maybe how poetry influences me. I think it also influences me in just on a sonic kind of level. I am a very subtle kind of sonic kind of writer where I think there are many writers who pay attention to that a lot more than I do. But I read everything I write, I read out loud like as soon as I write it. And if it doesn't work, I fix it until it sounds right out loud. And so that's why I can't really, I mean, I can write in public, like if I go to a coffee shop or something, but I just tend to not whisper to myself when I'm out in public. And then I think sometimes my writing suffers. I have to go home and like edit it to make it sound right again.
Yeah.
But so I think in those two ways, it's influenced me heavily.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the 48th hour. I'm curious to hear you talk about how you wound up using that kind of epistolary form. You said that it's written in voicemails. How did you decide to write that story in that form?
Um, I think it came down to just what made sense for the story that I was figuring out in the moment.
Hmm.
I had the ending in mind first, and then I had the idea of someone. I originally wanted it to be about someone who uses like AI to try to write a James Patterson kind of novel, and he's like in love with it. I scrapped the AI part of it and just like had him just be a really bad James Patterson knockoff kind of writer. But I don't not that you I don't know if you can be a bad James Patterson knockoff writer anyway. Um, but so then this is kind of how I kind of formulate a lot of my stories. It's like I have one idea or two big ideas, and like what happens if I like chemically combine them, what kind of fizzes up from from that combination. And then from that chemical combination, then you find your story and then you kind of structure everything around it. And so in this case, I kind of just found this lonely guy who wants to connect with someone, and it just kind of started falling into place that it had to be this kind of missed connection, these two people who are in opposite worlds. So like I have this one character who's back at home and another character who's like all the way on the other side of the world in Japan, and he's leaving him voicemails because they're in different time zones and he's sleeping this whole time. And so it just made sense for what the story was about for this character. And so that's kind of how it slowly came to be about, I guess.
And is that generally how your process tends to work? That you start with an idea and you start writing it and then you kind of find the form that way? Or do you sometimes like have an idea where, oh, I want to try out this like wacky form. And so like that's the starting point. Like in general, how does your process tend to work?
Sometimes it's both. It's not. I don't think it's ever that I start with like I want to try a wacky form just for a wacky form. But I'll have like an idea in my head about like what would happen if a story was told this way,
Hmm.
and like what kind of story would that be about? Sometimes it comes that way. Sometimes it comes like the way I said it, where I just have just like an idea for a story or two ideas or something, and I combine them or something, and I find some sort of magic because the form for me is the thing that tells us the most about the story. It's the structure, it's the scaffolding, and it's the bones and the and it's the architecture, and it's how you it's like almost like the Rosetta Stone of the story is through the form. I am always hyper aware of the reader questioning, why is it being told this way to us? And if there is no good answer for that, then I think the form is failing,
Right.
and you're just kind of playing around. Um, but if you can find something from the way that a story is told, then I think that's the most illuminating thing a story can do. Um, and then the character and the story kind of come alive.
Well, let's talk a bit more about the content of your writing. You described yourself to me as a queer writer from a pseudo rural Midwestern town who can't seem to erase those influences from his writing. In what ways do you see those themes showing up in your work?
Yeah, it's something that I do think about a lot, because I tend to write very location-based stories that almost are not almost never, I would say at least 2/3 of them are not set in the Midwest. They're set in very specific places, usually in the United States, but oftentimes not in the Midwest. But then when I write about these places, like if I write something set in the South or set on the West Coast or the East Coast or whatever, I I still see the Midwest in those places that I'm writing, and it's kind of just like these places of vacuum, right? That's how I kind of see at least my Midwest is, this kind of vacuum of leftovers where kind of anything is possible, and then when anything is possible, um, it almost feels like it's overwhelming, and then nothing is possible. Um, it's hard to erase those things from the other places that I write about. And also because I think the Midwest, it just feels too close. Like I currently live in the Midwest. I've lived in the Midwest my whole life. So it feels like it's just like I'm too close to everything to write about it truthfully. But then when I write about other places, that's almost when it feels like the Midwest comes out the most. And I kind of create these weird, like if I have a story that's set in Sparks, Nevada, and it feels like a weird combination between a desert town and Midwest dairy center, and I don't and then maybe that gives, like, my work, like, some sort of unique flavor, maybe that's also just, like, a flaw, and, like, the settings don't feel real, um, but it is something that I can't shake, and I think someday I will maybe learn how to write about the Midwest more truthfully, but it's hard to shake that.
Yeah, it's interesting because, on this podcast, we talk a lot about what writers choose to write. But in my experience, even when I feel like I'm making a choice to write about one thing, by the time the story is finished, it's like become what it wanted to become. Like my subconscious is getting in there, whether I like
Mhm.
it or not, right? So, yeah, it's interesting. How much we actually get to choose what the themes are in our work, or if they're just like coming through us. I mean, have you noticed that in your work where you feel like you don't necessarily have control over what the story's about?
Well, I think that's the kind of the eternal battle, right? I think we have intense control over what we want our stories to be about, but I think when we have that level of control, it's when it is our stories are the worst.
Yeah.
Um, I think when I see writers fail, like when I read a story and I'm like this doesn't work, it often feels like it's because the writer really wanted it to be about something beforehand, and sometimes it can work to an extent, I think there are many writers who write about a very particular thing, or they have a message in mind that they really want out there, and I think that can work, but I think most of the time it feels like everything else then starts to fail in accordance to what the author wanted the story to be about in the first place, and they didn't let the characters tell the story. And so I think that is a thing that I struggle with because I do want my stories to feel like they matter and to feel like they have themes and messages, but you kind of I have to learn to let that stuff just come out naturally and let the characters tell it. But I do think we have control. Like if I wanted to write a story about something, I could. I just don't know if it would be any good.
Right. It makes me think of this quote from Flannery O'Connor. She said, I'm paraphrasing, but she said, "You can choose what you write, but you can't choose what you make live."
Mhm.
And I think about that a lot. We can't choose our pasts. We can't choose the experiences we've had that have shaped our worldviews. And we can try to force a character to be a certain way or try to force a story to say a certain thing. But if it's not aligning with how we truly feel about the world, I think the reader feels that, right? You feel some kind of tension between what the story's trying to do and maybe what the author actually feels or something like that. It's a hard thing to put into words, but it is a thing that you can feel when you read the piece, right?
You feel it so intensely. I think when I read for the literary journal I work for, I think, you see that, so it's like it feels like it's the biggest mistake you see when you get something. It's like the writer just wanted this story to be saying something about the zeitgeist in some way, or and I think the zeitgeist will come out in your work because it is the zeitgeist. But if you force it, then it just feels like it's about nothing.
Yeah, it's hard though, right? It's hard, especially, once you get into an MFA program and you start thinking about publishing and you start thinking about like, what is a publisher going to look for? Like, I have to write a story that says something that's going to like resonate with people. And if that gets into your head, it can really get in the way of that kind of play that we're talking about in the writing process, being comfortable playing around with form and playing around with structure and seeing what happens and letting the story evolve and letting it become what it wants to be naturally instead of just kind of forcing it into this thing.
Yeah, and I feel and I do feel the tension that people have with that also, because I think we do unfortunately live in somewhat of an ecosystem where writers are sometimes often rewarded for writing these things that are very project based, that are very about a particular thing, because it's kind of sometimes often what sells the most. And I think sometimes the writers who are able to make that work are just kind of writers who have stumbled upon something that already was working for them in their writing, and it wasn't necessarily something that felt forced. But it does feel very much like it's about something in particular, and because that's the kind of the stuff that people, I think, oftentimes agents or publishers want because it's what sells, then it feels like everyone has to conform in some way to that. But I think that's maybe misguided, because I think that sometimes those are just happy accidents when those things are the most successful. But I understand the pull to want to do that, and I feel it for myself. But I think we all have to maybe fight against it as much as we can.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about your time in the MFA. You're currently attending the University of Illinois. They have a 3-year program that is fully funded and has tracks in fiction and poetry. The program is located in Urbana-Champaign. What drew you to that program at the University of Illinois?
So, my experience when applying was I just kind of did like a scatter shot and applied to like 20 places. And because that was the advice that I was given from like my undergrad professors, like apply to more places than you think you need to. And so I applied to just like I applied to a lot of Midwest schools in particular, but also just like everywhere. And places that I felt like for one, were at least, gave you a living kind of stipend, that felt like, I could see myself living there and thriving there. Um, so I think on the surface, I felt that about Illinois, but I didn't necessarily feel it like initially when I applied. It was kind of like one place that I was like, this could work. And then I got into a few places, so I had to kind of make my decision. And uh, and then the reason I came down to Illinois was for, I think, two big reasons. The first, probably most important, is that it felt like I was wanted here the most. I felt like I was really fought for. I felt like there was just a lot more communication. It felt like the community here was a lot tighter. It felt like it was just very cohesive. And then secondly, it feels like the stipend, workload, and living cost is almost unrivaled compared to anywhere other than Illinois, from my perspective, and that was really hard to turn down as well.
Well, you mentioned the community. I'm curious to hear you talk a bit more about that. Now that you're in the program, what has the community been like there at the University of Illinois?
Yeah, the community is the thing that I think I value most here in the program. There's only so much that classes and faculty can offer you, and I think it often comes down to who can you lean on day in and day out for becoming a better writer, because that's the thing that I think when you become a better writer, through incremental change, through kind of just exposing yourself to everything that's out there. And when you're in community with a group of people who are also in that same mindset, that's the thing that I feel like, for me at least, has grown my writing abilities the most. I think, I didn't know a lot of writers, like, in undergrad, or people who at least would take it seriously, you know? It was a kind of like a culture shock to meet other people who were also, I knew writers, I guess, like, in undergrad or whatever, but they didn't take it seriously. It was just like, "Oh, this is a fun thing I do on the side," which is totally valid, but to meet other people who also take it seriously, it just kind of opens you up to, like, "Oh, this is the world that I feel like I belong in." And then when you kind of inhabit that mind space, you really start to see things change in the way you view just, like, writing in general. Like, I feel like I'm almost a entirely different writer than I was when I entered. And so the community aspect has been the thing that has been, I think, the most valuable to me.
And if the website's correct, the program has about 18 students in it at one time and about 8 faculty members, which is a pretty good ratio. What's it been like working with the faculty at Illinois?
Yeah, the faculty have all been amazing on it's maybe, I don't know if this is, common for all MFA programs, but for here at least, there's, like, even a really good connection between not just the fiction faculty, but also the poetry faculty. I feel like I've been learning a lot from both, even though I don't have classes with the poetry faculty. Um, just the way that even the faculty are part of the writing community here, I feel like I've learned from them in that way as well. But, we have, like, Amy Hassinger, we have Alex Shakar, we have David Wright, and we have, Ted Sanders on fiction, and all of them are, we kinda joke about it sometimes, but all of them are very good at, like, a particular thing or a few particular things, but then there's not a ton of overlap. I mean, they're all good writers, so they all have overlap in a lot of the basics, but they all kind of have things that are, unique to them,
Mhm.
and so it makes it kind of easy for the cohort to, like, kind of, like, find a faculty member that you connect with the most. And so that's been really interesting to see, just, like, how do certain people connect with others, and how can you learn from someone who has, like, a completely different view of fiction than you do. Um, and just the variety on top of the small community it feels like it's a really healthy kinda thing.
Yeah. And what about the kind of greater community in Champaign, Urbana? What's it been like living there?
It's So I went to undergrad at the University of Wisconsin, so it's kind of a similar kind of, it's just another Big 10 Midwest school.
Mhm.
Um, it's a little different in that it's less of a city, and it's more of like the campus is everything, and then there's, like, a downtown, and then there's, like, 2 suburbs. It feels like the campus is everything here, and, um it feels like you're kind of doing the same thing, like, every weekend a little bit, um, but that sameness kind of elevates the writing and the studies a lot, I think. It feels like, okay, if you wanna leave, like, there's, like, 3 major cities all within 2 hours driving distance, and if you wanna experience something else, you can, but if you just kinda, it feels like whenever you come home, there's nothing to distract you, I guess, from your writing, which is good.
Right. Well, as I mentioned, the program is fully funded, with all students receiving full tuition waivers, guaranteed teaching assistantships, and partial fee waivers. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the website says you all teach one class each semester in the program, except for the first semester of your second year when you teach 2 classes. So, what kinds of classes do you teach in the program?
Yeah, so the teaching load has been kind of a fluctuating kind of thing since I've been here, but it's gotten lowered since I've started. And so I guess the easiest way to simplify how it works, that your first year you only teach a 1 class in the fall, 1 class in the spring. And then your second year you have the option to teach either a 2-1 or a 2-2. If you teach a 2-2, you get a little more money. You get about, like, $31,000. If you teach a 2-1, you get, like, 27,000 or something. And then your third year, you can either do a 2-2 or a 1-1, and the 1-1 is the same as the 2-1 pay-wise from the second year, or you can make the 2-2 pay. I think most people choose to always do the lesser teaching loads for every year just because it's not the amount of work it is not worth the amount of money you get usually, unless you get like a fee waiver. But to answer your question about what classes you teach, your first year you always teach rhetoric or just like essay writing. And then your second year, you everyone gets an opportunity to teach one workshop in creative writing. Um, I got to teach film last semester. That was really, really cool. I had to take a class to be able to allow me to teach film, but that was something new for the program. They had never had a MFA student want to teach film before, and so it was kind of like a test run, and I really loved it. Um, and I think it's like a good resume builder to have been able to have taught film. Um, and then your third year, there is an opportunity to teach like an elevated creative writing class. It's called like Reading for Writers. It's called CW 200. And it's kind of more of a literature based creative writing class that you have the opportunity to teach. Or you can always just keep teaching rhetoric, which is kind of the thing that is employing most of the grad students is teaching rhetoric. But there is always opportunity to teach more creative writing, usually, at least for fiction. Poetry tends to be a little more scant, so like you get usually one opportunity. If you're lucky, you get two. For fiction, there's a lot more opportunities to teach it more than once. But those are the two main things: creative writing, rhetoric, maybe film, maybe those. You could also take a class to teach literature. I don't know if you can do that here. I don't know if anyone has ever done that before, but I think it's a possibility.
And how have you enjoyed teaching?
Teaching has been amazing. I think rhetoric is one beast. It was tough to acclimate to at first because I had never taught anything before, and so it was just like I don't even know how to do this in the first place. And then once you get like a semester down, the second semester goes much smoother, and you kind of get into a rhythm and you find your persona, and you figure out what's needed of you and how much to dedicate yourself to what this is, and also a lot of people do love teaching rhetoric. I'm not necessarily one of those people, and maybe I shouldn't say that out loud because maybe I'll want a job teaching rhetoric someday. So, um, but I do see the value in it, and I find moments where I'm like, oh, this is really when you find the students who you can reach. Maybe I was almost going to say the students who care, but I think almost no one goes into a rhetoric class caring. You kind of have to figure out how to make them care. And that's so that those moments are fun and enlightening. But when I've gotten to teach film and creative writing, that was like a whole new world. I'm like, oh, students who are here to care, and I have relationships with these students who I feel like I've connected with, and I feel like I've helped change or in some way or shown them something new that they have appreciated. And it's been interesting in that way. I've known I've always wanted to teach in some capacity, probably like at a university level, and that's just kind of reaffirmed like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do.
The website says that students may also be able to potentially reduce their teaching load in exchange for working at Ninth Letter, which is the literary magazine published at U of I, which is the one that you're currently working with. What can you tell us about Ninth Letter and your experience as an editor there?
Yeah, it's a great opportunity to, if you like, the student, we all have the opportunity to apply to be an associate editor for any of the three genres. So like right now I'm the if you get the creative nonfiction associate editor position, you also get the managing editor position, and it's a year-long thing. And so like right now I'm paid to teach a 2-2, but I'm only really teaching a 1-1, and the workload is not nearly as much as teaching would be, so it feels like a really nice gig. But Ninth Letter is really the thing that I've well, not maybe not the thing that I've most come to appreciate about this program, but it's like this little hidden gem that I didn't fully appreciate when I got in, how amazing Ninth Letter is. and how also enlightening it would be just for my writing process, just the ability to read slush and figure out this like what not what not to do. Um, but I find a lot of pride in the journal. I think we're doing really cool work design wise, and just like the types of things that we look for, and um especially creative nonfiction. I didn't really have an interest in creative nonfiction until I started reading for that side of the journal when I got here, and that's been really interesting how I can relate that genre to my writing. Um, yeah, Ninth Letter, I think I can't sing its praises more. I think it should be much more I think it is already a popular literary journal, but I think it should be the most popular because I think we're doing really cool stuff.
Send it to the top, number one on all the lists.
Yeah. Tell Clifford Garstang
Yeah, right. And Erica Krause. Put it
and
at
Erica
number one.
Krauss.
So you mentioned like the stuff you've learned about your own writing from working on the journal. I'm curious to hear you talk about that a bit more. How have you seen it affecting your writing?
Yeah, it just really has shown me maybe to I think some people maybe even have criticisms for how the literary journal scene has influenced fiction, because like you have to hook someone by the end of the first page, right?
Yeah.
Because like I know this when I'm reading, like if I am bored by the end of the first page, I'm gonna be a no on it, and I'm it's probably not gonna go through. And if it doesn't have like a strong kind of voice, if it doesn't, if there's like even like one, I'm more forgiving of like grammar or spelling mistakes than maybe others are, but I know from hearing others' experiences on the journal, like if there's like one or two mistakes on the first page, like that's an immediate no for them. Because to them it shows that like a kind of carelessness that they don't respect necessarily. So it just has really shown me like what, even just like on the in the cover letter kind of front, like if a cover letter is like annoying me, I'm like somehow more subconsciously just like predisposed to not like whatever the writing is. I think I'm able to forgive it if the writing is good, like, try to, distance myself from just, like, trying to see if the writing is any good or not, but I can't lie and say that doesn't influence me in some way. Like, if someone writes, 1,000-word cover letter and they start talking about all their plants and all of their hijinks they get into in their summer house, with their dogs, I'm like, "Alright. Cool." But it's taught me what kind of, more so than anything, like what not to do. Sometimes what to do, but I don't think there is ever a way to do anything, a one way to do anything. But it's really taught me what not to do.
It sounds super interesting. It sounds like your experience in the program's been fruitful in a lot of different ways. Before we go, I want to ask, what is one way in which the MFA experience has been different, for better or for worse, from your expectations when applying?
I think the thing that has been the most different from my expectations were, I think my intention going in was that I was kind of gonna really just kind of sit down and focus on my writing for 3 years. And, if community happens, it happens. If it doesn't, then it doesn't. But I'm here to focus on my writing, which is what I have done. However, the thing that has been different than what I expected is how much that community has mattered and shaped my writing, and how I've learned that you can't even really divorce the personal from the community in that way. It's like your writing suffers if it doesn't have community around it. And I didn't necessarily expect that going in. I kind of thought I'm just gonna use these 3 years to figure out what I want to write and like become a better writer, and uh, have a career maybe off of that. And if I, if I don't find that community, or if I just like find like a more superficial one while I'm here, then that's cool. But it's really taught me that you can't have good writing without community, as a central kind of network behind it.
Well, I'm really happy that you're now part of our little MFA Writers podcast community. So thanks so much for taking the time to stop by and chat with me. It's been really nice.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been really fun.